These are the RAF air gunners who flew in Britain's strangest fighter aircraft and actually shot down German bombers with verified combat reports, physical evidence, and documented kills. Fred Gash and his pilot Desmond Hughes claimed at least 5 enemy aircraft destroyed flying the Boulton Paul Defiant, a fighter with no forward-firing guns that relied entirely on a powered turret operated by the gunner, and Thorn and Frederick Barker, another Defiant crew, became the most successful team flying this unusual aircraft by shooting down 12 to 13 confirmed enemy aircraft before their partnership ended in 1941. Combat reports bearing their signatures exist in the National Archives. Their names appear on the Battle of Britain Memorial at Westminster Embankment in London, and the wreckage of aircraft they shot down has been excavated from English fields, with serial numbers matching their kill claims. German pilots they fought against survived as prisoners of war and told their stories. Photographs show their Defiant aircraft painted with kill markings below the cockpit, and the Imperial War Museums preserve images of the planes these men flew into combat. The Boulton Paul Defiant represents one of the most interesting failures and surprising successes in RAF history. Designed around outdated assumptions about air combat, it proved catastrophically vulnerable during daylight operations in the Battle of Britain, yet found unexpected effectiveness as a night fighter, and the air gunners who flew in Defiance faced extraordinary danger because escaping a damaged aircraft required getting out of a powered turret that frequently jammed, retrieving a parachute stowed in the fuselage, and bailing out, all while the aircraft might be spinning or on fire. Who these men were, what the Defiant actually was, and why it existed, how it performed in combat, the documented kills these crews achieved, and what happened to them after the war, that's what we'll examine today. This is verified military history with primary sources, not internet folklore. Before we continue, a word about the modern ritual of asking for subscriptions. Look, I know you're between 45 and 70 years old. You remember when getting information required going to an actual library and consulting actual books written by actual historians. You're watching this video because you value accuracy over entertainment, facts over clickbait. So here's the deal. If you appreciate historically verified content that actually cites sources and doesn't invent dramatic details to fill gaps in the record, hit that subscribe button. If you think YouTube needs more channels that tell you when they don't know something rather than making it up, leave a like. And if you've made it this far without falling for a video titled, "You won't believe what this RAF mechanic built from scrap," you've earned my respect, and I'd appreciate yours in return. Now, back to men who actually existed and things that genuinely happened. September 1939 brought Fred Gash into the Royal Air Force as an airman under training to become an air gunner, and by August 1940 he'd completed his training and joined 264 Squadron at Curtin in Lindsey, where he paired with pilot officer Frederick Desmond Hughes, who'd posted to the squadron in June 1940 after converting to Defiance at an operational training unit. Donaghadee near Belfast was where Hughes came from, the son of a linen firm director, and he'd been educated at Campbell College in Belfast and Pembroke College at Cambridge, where he read law. Learning to fly with the University Air Squadron led to a direct entry commission in the RAF on 3rd October 1939. Just after war broke out, his training took him through initial training wing at Cambridge and the RAF College at Cranwell and the School of Army Cooperation at Old Sarum, and finally to Aston Down to learn the Defiant. 19 June 1940 brought him to 264 Squadron at Duxford, and operations began. Gash and Hughes formed the kind of partnership that kept Defiant crews alive, positioning the aircraft to give the gunner the best possible firing solution, while simultaneously avoiding enemy fighters that could attack from angles the turret couldn't cover. fell to the pilot. The gunner had to acquire targets quickly and judge deflection and range and fire accurate bursts from a powered turret while the aircraft maneuvered, and communication between pilot and gunner determined whether they survived or died. Hughes and Gash developed that coordination through missions that tested it constantly. Edward Rowland Thorn and Frederick James Barker represented the other highly successful Defiant partnership. Thorn, known as Rowland at home but Ted in the RAF, entered the world in North End, Hampshire, on 15 April 1913. His father had been killed in the First World War when Ted was just 3 years old, and by August 1939, Thorn flew as an experienced sergeant pilot in the RAF operating Defiance with 264 Squadron. Marriage to Marion McAlpine came in August 1939 in Droxford, Hampshire, just before the shooting started. Frederick James Barker's birth occurred in Bow, London on 16th March 1918, making him 5 years younger than Thorn. Old Palace School and Cooper's Company School provided his education before joining the RAF Volunteer Reserve. In April 1939, when war began, he was called to active duty and trained as an air gunner, and pairing with Thorn in 264 Squadron sent the two into some of the most intense air combat of 1940 and 1941. Trust developed under fire made these partnerships work. A Defiant pilot flew into combat knowing he had no forward-firing guns, that enemy fighters would try to attack from ahead or below, where his gunner couldn't shoot, and that his survival depended on the man in the turret behind him, spotting threats and engaging them before they could deliver fatal hits. And the gunner sat in a powered turret with 4 machine guns, responsible not just for shooting down enemy aircraft, but for defending both himself and his pilot against attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. One mistake or one jammed gun or one moment of poor communication meant both men died. Other Defiant crews achieved kills beyond these 4 men. Albert Lippett, another gunner with 264 Squadron, is credited with 12 confirmed victories. Numerous other crews shot down German aircraft and survived to tell about it. But Gash and Hughes, and particularly Thorn and Barker, represent the most successful and best documented examples of what Defiant crews could achieve when the aircraft worked correctly and the crew operated in perfect coordination. The documentary record for these men runs deep. Combat reports bearing their signatures sit in the National Archives. Awards were gazetted in the London Gazette with specific dates and citations. Photographs survive showing their aircraft with kill markings painted below the cockpit, and the Imperial War Museums hold images of Hughes and Gash's Defiant, registration number N1801, call sign PSB, nicknamed Coimbatore 2, clearly showing 5 kill markings, and the Red Hand of Ulster badge representing Hughes's Northern Ireland homeland. Post-war life for Fred Gash included working as a duty officer at Seaboard World Airlines at Heathrow. Colleagues who worked with him in the 1970s remembered him as a true gentleman, quiet about his wartime service and modest about his distinguished flying medal, and he participated in the 1970s excavation of a Heinkel bomber he and Hughes had shot down in 1941, receiving a piece of the wreckage as a memento. His family preserved bomber parts and photographs from his service. Hughes went on to an extraordinary career that started with converting to Bristol Beaufighters in 1942 and flying with 125 and 600 squadrons, increasing his score of enemy aircraft destroyed. July 1944 brought him command of 604 Squadron Flying Mosquitoes, and by January 1945 his total victories reached 18.5 enemy aircraft. He stayed in the RAF after the war, eventually becoming an Air Vice Marshal, and from 1970 to 1972 he served as Commandant of the RAF College at Cranwell, the very institution where he'd trained in 1940. overseeing Prince Charles earning his wings during this period. Retirement came in 1974, followed by service as Honorary Air Commodore and Deputy Lieutenant of Lincolnshire. Thorn's story ended tragically after his partnership with Barker ended in October 1941, when Thorn was commissioned and posted to 32 Squadron flying Hurricanes. He rose rapidly through the ranks. By August 1942, he commanded his squadron during the disastrous Dieppe raid on 19th August 1942. As a substantive flight lieutenant and acting squadron leader, he survived the war and received the Distinguished Flying Cross with bars, in addition to his Distinguished Flying Medal with bar. But on 12th of February 1946, he was killed testing an early jet fighter. 32 years old was all he got. Barker remained with 264 Squadron until 1943, then was posted to the Middle East as an air gunnery instructor. He was commissioned in April 1944 and released from the RAF in 1946 as a flying officer, and what happened to him after that isn't documented in available sources. Real men with real lives who flew real combat missions in an aircraft that history remembers as a failure, yet they succeeded where the aircraft design failed them. Understanding what these men achieved requires understanding what they flew, and the Boulton Paul Defiant emerged from assumptions about air combat that proved catastrophically wrong, yet the aircraft itself represented innovative engineering applied to an obsolete concept. 1935 brought the Air Ministry issuing specification F935, calling for a two-seater, day and night turret fighter capable of 290 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. RAF thinking in the mid-1930s assumed future air combat would resemble naval battles with formations of bombers approaching Britain without fighter escorts. Because Germany lay too far away for single-engine fighters to accompany bombers to their targets, the RAF believed its own turret-armed bombers, like the Vickers Wellington, could penetrate German airspace and defend themselves, and that the Luftwaffe would operate similarly, and turret-armed fighters would approach enemy bomber formations from below or from the side, coordinate their fire like ships in a battle line, and destroy bombers through concentrated firepower from multiple angles. Separating the tasks of flying the aircraft and firing the guns would theoretically allow the pilot to concentrate on positioning while the gunner engaged the enemy. Boulton Paul aircraft, which had considerable experience with defensive turrets from producing the Overstrand bomber, submitted the P-82 design, and designer John Dudley North created an aircraft similar in size and appearance to the Hawker Hurricane, differing primarily in having all its armament concentrated in a powered dorsal turret behind the pilot's cockpit. 11 August 1937 saw the first prototype, designated K-8310, fly without its turret installed, and in this configuration it resembled the Hurricane and showed impressive performance. The second prototype flew later that year with the turret fitted, and the performance penalty became obvious immediately. The turret, designated Type A MKID, was an electro-hydraulically powered unit based on a French SAM company design that Boulton Paul had licensed, and it mounted four 0.303-inch Browning machine guns, each with 600 rounds of ammunition, for a total of 2,400 rounds available. Rotation through 360 degrees was possible, though cutoff mechanisms prevented the guns from firing when pointed at the propeller disc or tailplane. 8 December 1939 brought the Defiant entering service with 264 Squadron at RAF Martlesham Heath. The Mk1 version ran on a Rolls-Royce Merlin III engine, producing 1,030 horsepower, the same engine used in early Spitfires and Hurricanes, but the Defiant's top speed reached only 302 to 304 miles per hour, compared to over 360 for a Spitfire, and the additional weight of the turret, the second crew member, and the aerodynamic drag reduced performance significantly. No forward-firing guns whatsoever appeared on the aircraft. This wasn't an oversight, but a deliberate design choice based on the turret fighter concept. The pilot was completely defenseless if attacked from ahead or from directly below, where the turret's minimum elevation of 19 degrees prevented it from firing. The turret had excellent fields of fire to the sides and rear, and the gunner used a reflector sight for aiming, but attacking from certain angles rendered the Defiant helpless. Gunners entered and exited through a hatch in the rear of the turret, but in an emergency this system proved deadly. Turrets that jammed in a position other than facing rearward trapped the gunner, who couldn't get out through the hatch. Even if the turret functioned properly, the gunner couldn't wear a parachute inside because there wasn't enough room. The parachute was stowed in the fuselage, meaning an emergency bailout required the gunner to exit the turret and retrieve the parachute and put it on, and then bail out all while the aircraft might be on fire or spinning or under attack. And many Defiant gunners died because they couldn't escape damaged aircraft in time. A special all-in-one survival garment called a parasuit, nicknamed the Rhino suit, was developed to help address this problem. Combining an inner layer that fit like a wetsuit, the parachute fitted around this, then the dinghy and outer clothing, all in one garment with inner webbing and pockets that fell apart when the gunner bailed out. Frederick Gus Platz, an air gunner who served in 230, 282, and 208 squadrons, later stated that the Rhino suit was difficult to work with, but there was no alternative, and it killed dozens of gunners despite being the best solution available. Pneumatically powered aerodynamic fairings fitted to the fuselage could be lowered to allow the turret to rotate freely, and the guns were electrically fired. Construction used an unusual method where light alloy skins were riveted to stringers and ribs while flat then attached to the fuselage frame and wing spars. This avoided pre-forming the skins and created an exceptionally smooth surface finish, but was time-consuming. Production totaled approximately 1,220 aircraft across all variants. 723 Mk1 examples rolled off the lines. The Mk2 night fighter version, with the more powerful Merlin XX engine, producing 1,280 horsepower, accounted for 210 aircraft, and various target towing and training variants made up the remainder. And by 1943, Defiance had been withdrawn from combat operations entirely, relegated to training and target towing and electronic countermeasures and air-sea rescue duties. Sound engineering applied to a flawed concept is what the Defiant represented. The turret worked as designed, the aircraft flew well, and in the hands of skilled crews it could be deadly. But the fundamental assumption that bomber formations would arrive unescorted proved completely wrong once German fighters operating from bases in northern France could reach London with enough fuel to provide escort. 12 May 1940 brought the Defiant's first operational sortie during the German invasion of France and the Low Countries. 6 Defiants from 264 Squadron, escorted by 6 Spitfires of 66 Squadron, flew over the English Channel to the coastline near The Hague in the Netherlands. During this patrol, they shot down a single Junkers Ju-88 that had been attacking a destroyer, and the Defiant's combat career began with a successful engagement. The next day, 13th of May, brought the first indication that the Defiant concept had serious problems. Repeating the previous day's mission on patrol, the Defiants claimed 4 Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, but then Messerschmitt Bf-109E fighters attacked the formation, and the escorting Spitfires were unable to prevent 5 of the 6 Defiants from being shot down through frontal attacks that the turrets couldn't counter. Only 1 Defiant returned from that mission. The squadron had learned that Bf-109 pilots, who understood what they were facing, could destroy Defiants with ease by attacking from angles where the turret offered no defense. The evacuation of the British Expeditionary Force from Dunkirk between 27 May and 31 May 1940 brought 264 Squadron into intensive combat operations. RAF Manston served as the base to provide air cover for the evacuation, and the Defiants initially achieved remarkable success because German pilots didn't know what they were facing. 27 May saw the squadron claim 3 Heinkel He-111 bombers destroyed and 2 damaged. The next day, 28 May, 10 Defiants took off and were attacked shortly afterward by approximately 30 Bf-109s. The Defiant pilots formed a defensive circle, an ever-descending Luftwaffe maneuver that sacrificed altitude but provided 360-degree defensive fire, and they claimed 6 Bf-109s shot down for the loss of 3 Defiants, showing that the defensive circle tactic could work against fighters if the crews executed it properly. Thorn and Fred Barker flew in the thick of this combat. Flying just north of Dunkirk on 28 May, their flight was attacked by a formation of Bf-109s. Thorn's skillful handling of the aircraft enabled Barker to shoot down 3 of them very quickly, and this action formed part of the basis for their first Distinguished Flying Medal awards. 29 May 1940 became the squadron's best day, remembered in Defiant history as an extraordinary achievement. 37 kills in 2 sorties were claimed, though some sources list the total as high as 65 for the entire Dunkirk period. The breakdown included 19 Ju-87 Stukas, mostly picked off as they came out of their dives, 9 Messerschmitt Bf-110 twin-engine heavy fighters, 8 Bf-109s, and a Ju-88, and Thorn and Barker flew 2 missions that day. Around 15 hours on the first mission, they shot down a Ju-87 and a Bf-110. At 19:30 hours on the second mission, they destroyed another Ju-87 and another Bf-110, and they also claimed a share in destroying a Heinkel He-111. 1 Defiant gunner was lost after bailing out on 29 May, but the pilot managed to fly the damaged aircraft back to base, and it was subsequently repaired. And the success rate seemed to vindicate the Defiant concept, but the reality ran deeper than the numbers suggested. German pilots were initially mistaking Defiants for Hurricanes and attacking from the rear, where they encountered concentrated defensive fire from 4 machine guns. The Defiant's turret, when the target approached from the stern, could deliver devastating firepower. Luftwaffe fighters that bounced Defiant formations from behind suffered losses because they weren't expecting the rear-firing armament, and the element of surprise, not the inherent superiority of the design, explained the early victories. 31 May, the last day of major Dunkirk combat operations, saw Thorn and Barker shoot down 2 He-111 bombers and damage 2 more. Their flight commander, Nicholas Cook, failed to return from that mission, but the squadron also lost 7 Defiants in one day, as Hurricanes and Spitfires failed to come to their aid in battles with Bf-109s, demonstrating that without friendly fighter cover, Defiants were vulnerable. The Dunkirk summary tells the real story. Claims of 48 to 57 kills in 8 days, depending on which source you consult, but verified German losses numbered only 12 to 15 aircraft. The victory-loss ratio stood at approximately 1-to-1, and out of 16 Defiants in the Squadron 14 were lost. Overclaiming resulted from the turret's wide angle of fire, allowing several Defiants to engage the same target simultaneously, with multiple crews claiming credit for the same kill. The joint citation for Thorn and Fred Barker's first Distinguished Flying Medals, gazetted on 14 June 1940, reads like this: Sergeant Thorn and leading aircraftman Barker, as pilot and air gunner respectively, have shown considerable determination and skill when engaging the enemy in a Defiant aircraft. On one occasion, when 3 similar aircraft in their squadron had been shot down, these airmen engaged 3 Messerschmitt 109s, which were operating on the rear of the squadron, and succeeded in shooting them down. The remaining enemy aircraft were forced to break off the engagement. Sergeant Thorn and leading aircraftman Barker have so far destroyed 6 enemy aircraft. 6 confirmed kills by early June 1940 made them one of the most successful crews in the squadron, but the Dunkirk operations also revealed the Defiant's fundamental vulnerability, and once German pilots learned to identify Defiants and attack from angles the turret couldn't cover, the aircraft's lack of forward armament became a potentially fatal weakness. 22 August 1940 brought 264 Squadron relocating to RAF Hornchurch in Essex, using RAF Manston as a forward base in response to urgent demands for aircraft to defend Britain's airspace during the Battle of Britain. The squadron was thrown into the daylight defense of southern England against the full weight of the Luftwaffe, and within 5 days the Defiant's unsuitability for this role became brutally apparent. 24 August saw 9 Defiants scramble from Manston to engage an incoming German force. The ensuing combat brought them shooting down 3 Ju-88 bombers and 1 Bf-109E, but 2 Defiants were lost. Later that same day, another cluster of German bombers appeared and were engaged by 7 Defiants that had been refueling after the morning mission. They shot down 3 Ju-88s and 2 Bf-109Es, losing 1 Defiant shot down and 1 damaged, and squadron leader Philip Hunter, the squadron commander, and his gunner were last seen chasing an enemy bomber out to sea, posted missing when they failed to return. Thorn and Barker flew in action on 24 August and shot down a Ju-88 that was part of a flight that had just bombed an RAF base, but the squadron was being decimated, and the loss of the commanding officer struck a severe blow to morale, demonstrating that even experienced crews couldn't survive indefinitely against overwhelming numbers. The catastrophic day arrived on 26 August 1940. Midday brought 264 Squadron engaging a formation of 12 Dornier Do-17 bombers over northeastern Kent, but a large formation of Bf-109s from Jagdgeschwader 3 attacked the Defiants. 3 aircraft were lost, including 2 credited to Hauptmann Gunther Lutzow, a German ace, and the Defiants did shoot down 6 Do-17s and 1 Bf-109 in return, with 3 of those victories going to a single Defiant crew. Ted Thorn and Fred Barker, flying Defiant L7005, shot down 2 Dornier Do-17s over Dover. Commencing an attack on a third Do-17 brought a Bf-109, attacking them and badly damaging their aircraft. Thorn dived quickly away to crash land the crippled Defiant, which had caught fire, but the Bf-109 came in for a second attack at 500 feet, and Barker, still in his turret despite the fire and the aircraft's desperate situation, assisted a Hurricane in shooting down the attacking Bf-109 before Thorn crash-landed near Chislett. Both men escaped with slight injuries, though their aircraft was destroyed. This action formed the basis for their Bar to the Distinguished Flying Medal, gazetted on 11 February 1941, which noted, "Flight Sergeant Thorn and Sergeant Barker have constantly operated together as pilot and air gunner in Defiant aircraft and were awarded the DFM after shooting down 6 enemy aircraft. As a team, they have now accounted for 6 further enemy aircraft." The citation specifically describes how they destroyed 2 Du-17s, were attacked by a Me-109, which set their Defiant on fire, yet managed to shoot down their attacker before crash landing. Fred Gash and Desmond Hughes flew in action on 26 August as well. Hughes's unpublished memoirs describe the engagement in vivid detail. At 15,000 feet over the East Kent coastline, they spotted a formation of Dornier Do-17s, and Hughes wrote, "The specks grew into the long, pencil-slim silhouettes of Dornier 17s, and suddenly there were the black crosses, insolently challenging us in our own backyard." Fred Gash took as his target the second Dornier and made no mistake. His de-wild incendiaries twinkled all over it, but particularly on its engine. It began to fall out of the formation. The hatch was jettisoned. 2 parachutes streamed as little dark figures bailed out, and the stricken aircraft went down increasingly steeply, with its starboard engine well alight. Chaotic action following the initial attack brought Gash engaging another Dornier, which Hughes later reported as having brewed up, a term typically used to describe complete destruction by fire and explosion. BF-109s then attacked the Defiants, and after shaking them off, Hughes and Gash headed back to base, where they discovered 6 bullet holes in their aircraft. And that night, Hughes sent a telegram to his parents that said simply, "2 up and lots to play." Hughes and Gash were credited with downing 2 Do-17s in that action. One of them has been speculatively identified as an aircraft that crashed on the Goodwin Sands and was later recovered from the seabed, though the attribution remains uncertain because the recovered aircraft shows a bullet strike from dead astern in one propeller blade, which doesn't fit Hughes's description of attacking from underneath, and Hughes saw crew bail out while the Goodwin Sands aircraft force landed, with the crew still aboard. Determining exactly which crew shot down which aircraft proves complex, even with physical evidence, and this case demonstrates the difficulty amply. 28 August brought the squadron losing 2 more Defiants, bringing the 5-day total to 9 aircraft and crews, and the squadron had been nearly wiped out. 5 days of operations from 24 to 28 August 1940 demonstrated that the Defiant could not survive in daylight combat against escorted bomber formations when German pilots understood what they were facing and exploited the aircraft's vulnerabilities. The Luftwaffe had changed tactics. BF-109 pilots now attacked Defiants from below, where the turret's minimum elevation prevented return fire, or from dead ahead, where the complete absence of forward-firing guns made the Defiant helpless. The additional weight and aerodynamic drag of the turret meant the Defiant couldn't outmaneuver or outrun single-seat fighters, and Defiant losses mounted particularly among gunners who were often unable to leave stricken aircraft when turrets jammed. The squadron developed a countermaneuver, the defensive Lufbery Circle, where Defiants flew in an ever-descending circular formation that sacrificed altitude but eliminated attack from below and provided 360-degree defensive fire coverage. When 264 Squadron used this tactic with disciplined execution, it provided some protection, but when 141 Squadron, another Defiant unit, was committed to the Battle of Britain and chose to ignore the advice from 264 Squadron about using the defensive circle, they suffered devastating consequences. After 28 August, the Defiant was withdrawn from daylight operations over southern England. The experiment had failed. The aircraft found success against unescorted bombers and achieved kills when surprise and favorable circumstances allowed. But against a determined fighter force that understood its weaknesses, the Defiant proved unsuitable for daylight combat, and the courage of crews like Thorn and Barker and Gash and Hughes couldn't overcome the fundamental design limitations. The Defiant's story could have ended in August 1940 as a failed experiment, but instead it found a new purpose where its disadvantages mattered less and its concentrated firepower proved effective. The Luftwaffe switched to night bombing in autumn 1940, launching the Blitz against British cities, and the RAF desperately needed night fighters to counter this threat. Darkness made the Defiant's vulnerabilities less critical. No single-seat fighters appeared at night to contend with. German bombers flying individually to their targets didn't have the mutual support of formations. The turret's field of fire and concentrated armament worked well against bombers approached from below and slightly to one side, which was the standard night fighting attack position, and the weight and drag that handicapped the Defiant in daylight dogfights mattered less when engaging bombers that weren't performing violent evasive maneuvers. 264 Squadron transitioned to night operations, and other squadrons received Defiants specifically for the night fighter role. The NFMKI designation indicated Defiants converted for night fighting. These served with 13 RAF squadrons between 1941 and 1943, and early operations were hampered by the lack of airborne radar, requiring crews to rely on ground control and visual acquisition in darkness. But as airborne interception radar became available, first the AI Mk4 and later improved versions, effectiveness increased. During the winter of 1940-41, when the Blitz on London reached its peak, the 4 squadrons of Defiants operating in the night fighter role shot down more enemy aircraft than any other type. This success vindicated the aircraft's design for one specific mission, even as it confirmed its failure for the broader role originally envisioned. Fred Gash and Desmond Hughes continued flying together as night fighters. Early hours of 16 October 1940 brought them destroying a He-111 over Brentwood, then overshooting the runway and missed on return to Luton, with both men unhurt despite the landing accident. During the night of 23-24 November, they attacked another He-111. But Gash's turret jammed and they could only claim it as a probable rather than confirmed destroyed. And the mechanical reliability of the turret, never perfect, became even more critical at night when a jammed gun could mean the difference between a kill and letting a bomber through to attack British cities. The night of 12-13 March 1941 brought one of the most thoroughly documented kills of the war. The enemy launched a major attack on Liverpool with more than 300 aircraft dispatched. That night featured a full moon with little cloud, conditions that greatly improved the chances of Defiant units intercepting Luftwaffe bombers, and Flying Officer Desmond Hughes in Defiant N1801 spotted a He-111 over Dorking at approximately 21:30 and maneuvered to engage from about 50 yards. The combat report describes what happened next. Hughes fired a series of 1-second bursts. The first burst started a small fire in the starboard engine, while the next 2 bursts set the engine thoroughly on fire. Gash transferred his attention to the cabin and fired several more bursts, with the dewiled ammunition being seen to burst inside the cabin, which immediately filled with flames, and the bomber then fell in a left-hand spiral dive and plunged to earth where the bomb load exploded. The Heinkel crashed at Dean Farm, Ockley, Surrey. Stabsfeldwebel Karl Bruning of KG-55, the pilot, bailed out and survived as the only one from his crew. He was picked up by 2 civilians who turned him over to a Home Guard unit, where he was given tea and cigarettes before being sent to a prisoner of war camp, and he spent 4 years as a POW in Canada. 1970-something brought the wreckage of this Heinkel being excavated, and the maker's plate showing the serial number 2994 was recovered, confirming the aircraft's identity and matching it to 5 Staffel, Kampfgeschwader 55. Fred Gash participated in this excavation and was presented with a part of the German bomber he'd shot down 30 years earlier, and this physical evidence combined with the combat report and German records and the testimony of the surviving pilot makes this one of the most thoroughly verified air combat kills of the Second World War. This represented Hughes's 4th victory. Nights of 8-9. April 1941 brought Hughes and Gash damaging another He-111, and on the night of 10-11 April they destroyed a Junkers Ju-88, and by this point they had at least 5 confirmed kills, 1 probable and 1 damaged between them. Ted Thorn and Fred Barker also continued operating as a team in the night fighter role. The night of 9-10 April 1941, during the height of the Blitz, brought them destroying a He-111 that crashed near Bushbridge, Surrey, and the bomber was identified as belonging to 5 Staffel KG-55, the same unit as the Heinkel that Hughes and Gash would shoot down later. Defiant night fighting tactics typically involved attacking enemy bombers from below, usually slightly ahead or to one side rather than from directly underneath the tail. This attack angle allowed the turret guns to fire into the bomber's fuselage and engines while minimizing the chance of return fire from the bomber's defensive gunners, and the concentration of 4 machine guns delivering 2,400 rounds of ammunition gave the Defiant substantial hitting power when the gunner aimed accurately. Trials were conducted to fit Defiant-style turrets to Bristol Beaufighters and de Havilland Mosquitoes to enable those aircraft to duplicate the Defiant's attack methods. But the effect on performance was so devastating that the idea was abandoned, and the Beaufighter and Mosquito, both twin-engine aircraft with far more power than the single-engine Defiant, couldn't accept the weight and drag penalty that the Defiant had been designed around from the start. Better-equipped night fighters entering service brought the Defiant being gradually withdrawn. The Beaufighter, with its 420mm cannon and superior performance, and the Mosquito, even faster and more heavily armed, replaced Defiants in frontline night fighter squadrons, and by 1943, the Defiant had been removed from combat duties entirely, reassigned to training and target towing and electronic countermeasures and air-sea rescue roles. Air-sea rescue duty brought Defiants being equipped with a pair of underwing pods containing dinghies that could be dropped to downed air crews in the water. Target towing meant the turret was removed and replaced with a fixed canopy over the winch operator's cockpit. A winch was attached to the fuselage side driven by a windmill propeller, and target sleeves were carried in a pack under the rear fuselage. 140 TT Mki aircraft were built specifically for target towing, and 150 Mki fighters were converted to TT Mki standard. The Defiant served in these secondary roles for the remainder of the war, training gunners and towing targets for fighter pilots to practice against and rescuing downed aircrew from the channel, and the aircraft that had failed as a day fighter and succeeded as a night fighter finished its career in unglamorous but necessary support roles. October 1941 brought Ted Thorn being commissioned as a pilot officer with service number 46957 and posted to 32 Squadron, which flew Hurricane fighters. This posting broke up the most successful Defiant crew of the war. Thorn and Barker had flown together through Dunkirk and the Battle of Britain and the night Blitz, accumulating 12 to 13 confirmed kills, and their partnership had been based on mutual trust developed under the most intense combat conditions imaginable. Barker remained with 264 Squadron for 2 more years. Skills he'd developed as a Defiant gunner made him valuable as an instructor, and in 1943 he was posted to the Middle East as an air gunnery instructor. He was commissioned in April 1944 and released from the RAF in 1946 as a flying officer, and what happened to him after the war isn't documented in the available sources. Thorn's career after leaving 264 Squadron shows how effective leadership combined with combat experience could lead to rapid advancement. August 1942 found him as a substantive flight lieutenant and acting squadron leader, commanding his squadron during the Dieppe raid on 19th August 1942. The Dieppe operation was a disaster for the forces on the ground, but 32 Squadron acquitted itself well in the air, and Thorn continued rising through the ranks, receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross, with bars to add to his Distinguished Flying Medal, with bar. 12 February 1946, less than a year after the war ended, brought Ted Thorn being killed in a crash while testing an early jet fighter. 32 years old was all he got. He'd survived Dunkirk and the Battle of Britain and the Blitz and years of combat operations, only to die in peacetime testing the new generation of aircraft that would replace the fighters he'd flown in war. And his death represents one of many post-war casualties among pilots. Transitioning to jet aircraft which had different handling characteristics and performance envelopes than the piston engine fighters they'd flown in combat. Desmond Hughes and Fred Gash continued flying together into 1942, but Hughes's demonstrated skill as a pilot and his growing tally of enemy aircraft destroyed meant he was destined for greater responsibilities. 1942 brought Hughes converting to the Bristol Beaufighter and flying with 125 Squadron and 600 Squadron RAF, further increasing his score of enemy aircraft. July 1944 found Hughes commanding 604 Squadron flying the de Havilland Mosquito. His squadron provided night fighter cover over the American sector during the invasion of Normandy and was the first Allied night fighter unit to operate from France after the invasion, and by January 1945, Hughes had accounted for 2 more enemy aircraft, bringing his total to 18.5 victories. The half-kill indicates a shared claim where 2 aircraft engaged the same target and credit was split. Fred Gash was commissioned in May 1943 from warrant officer and released from the RAF in 1945 as a flight lieutenant. Post-war work brought him to Seaboard World Airlines at Heathrow as a duty officer in the operations section, and colleagues who worked with him in the 1970s remembered him as the nicest person to work with, someone who had a lot of experience in general aviation but was quite reticent about his medal and the circumstances of its award, sometimes wearing a flying jacket to work and driving what younger colleagues described as a big British car, perhaps a Jaguar. He had the appearance to them of an upper-class war veteran, a true gentleman. 1970s brought someone who had known about Gash's wartime service, contacting him about the Heinkel he and Hughes had shot down on 12/13 March 1941. The wreckage was excavated from Dean Farm in Ockley, Surrey. Gash participated in the dig, and he was presented with a part of the German bomber, which he kept along with many other photographs and memorabilia from his service. His family preserved these items after his death. Hughes accepted a permanent commission in the RAF after the war and attended the RAF Staff College at Bracknell. Distinguished describes his post-war career. In 1951, he commanded the all-weather wing at the Central Fighter Establishment. In 1954, he returned to Bracknell for 2 years on the directing staff. He moved to the Ministry of Defense as personal staff officer to the Chief of the Air Staff, then commanded RAF Geilenkirchen in Germany in 1959, and in 1962 he became Director of Air Staff Plans at the Ministry of Defense and was promoted to Air Commodore. From 1970 to 1972, Air Vice Marshal Hughes served as Commandant of the RAF College at Cranwell, the very institution where he'd trained as a young pilot officer in 1940. During this period, he oversaw Prince Charles earning his wings, and after an assignment as Senior Air Staff Officer of the Near East Air Force in Cyprus, he retired in 1974, serving afterward as Honorary Air Commodore of the County of Lincoln Squadron of the Royal Auxiliary Air Force and as a Deputy Lieutenant of Lincolnshire. The trajectory from pilot officer flying Defiants in 1940 to Air Vice Marshal in retirement shows how wartime experience and demonstrated competence and sustained service could lead to the highest ranks. Hughes wore the Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 bars and the 1939-45 star with the Battle of Britain rosette, visible reminders of where his career began. Verification of these men's achievements rests on documentation that survives in multiple forms. Combat reports bearing Hughes and Gash's signatures exist in the National Archives describing the engagements in detail, with times and locations and altitudes and outcomes. These reports were filed by the crews immediately after returning from missions and later compiled into squadron records. Awards were gazetted in the London Gazette, the official publication of record for British government announcements. 18 April 1941 brought Fred Gash's Distinguished Flying Medal being gazetted, the joint citations for Ted Thorn and Fred Barker's DFMs were gazetted on 14th of June 1940, and the bars to their DFMs were gazetted on 11th February 1941, and these official documents provide specific language describing their achievements and the reasoning behind the awards. Photographs survive showing their aircraft with kill markings. The Imperial War Museums holds an image of Boulton Paul Defiant Mark I Night Fighter N1801 PSB, Coimbatore II of 264 Squadron RAF, undergoing routine service in a dispersal probably at Cologne, Wiltshire, and the caption notes, "This aircraft was flown by the effective night fighting team of Flying Officer F.D. Hughes, pilot, and Sergeant F. Gash, gunner, and displays a victory tally of 5 enemy aircraft shot down." The red hand of Ulster badge is visible on the aircraft, representing Hughes's Northern Ireland homeland. Physical evidence exists in the form of recovered aircraft wreckage. The Heinkel He-111, serial number 2994, shot down by Hughes and Gash on 12-13 March 1941, was excavated in the 1970s. The maker's plate showing 2994 was recovered and confirmed the aircraft belonged to KG-55, and parts of this aircraft were presented to Fred Gash. The Dornier Du-17 from the Goodwin Sands, possibly shot down on 26 August 1940, has been raised and is currently at RAF Museum Cosford for restoration, though the exact attribution of this kill remains uncertain due to conflicting details. The Battle of Britain Memorial on the Victoria Embankment in London lists the names of all aircrew who flew at least one authorized operational sortie between 10 July and 31 October 1940. Fred Gash's name appears on this memorial among the few who defended Britain during that critical period, and the memorial was unveiled years after the war and represents the official recognition of those who participated in the battle. German records provide corroboration. Stabsfeldwebel Karl Bruning's account of being shot down on 12-13 March 1941 appears in Volume 2 of the Blitz Then and Now on pages 468-469. He describes being shot down by a Defiant of 264 Squadron around 21:30, his Heinkel He-111 crashing at Dean Farm, Ockley, Surrey, bailing out as the only survivor, and being picked up by civilians who turned him over to the Home Guard, and this testimony from the German pilot confirms the British combat report from the perspective of the crew being shot down. Squadron diaries and operational records held by the RAF Museum and National Archives provide the broader context. These documents show the movements of 264 Squadron between bases, the dates of major operations, the losses suffered, and the tactical evolution as the squadron learned how to employ the Defiant effectively and when to avoid using it. Personal testimonies from colleagues who knew Fred Gash after the war appear on the 264 Squadron blog, where family members and former co-workers have shared memories. One comment reads, "Fred Gash is my dad. I would love any information on the top photograph. I still have the bomber parts presented to him, along with many other photographs." Another states, "I knew Fred when we both worked in the operations section of Seaboard World Airlines at Heathrow. We often worked together, and when things were slack on night shifts, spent hours talking. He was the nicest chap to work with and had a lot of experience in general aviation." The Gerard Pelletier photo album, preserved by his niece Chantal Saint-Amour, contains numerous images of 264 Squadron personnel, including photographs of Fred Gash posing with other airmen. These informal photographs show the human side of squadron life and provide visual documentation of the men who flew the missions. This layering of evidence, official combat reports and award citations, and photographs of aircraft with kill markings, and physical wreckage and testimony from both sides of the combat, and memorial inscriptions and personal recollections, creates a comprehensive picture that goes far beyond unsourced internet claims. These men existed, flew the missions described, achieved the kills claimed, and received official recognition during their lifetimes, and the documentation exists in archives and museums and official publications accessible to researchers who want to verify the facts. The Boulton Paul Defiant's story illustrates fundamental principles of military aviation that remain relevant. Assumptions about future combat must be tested against reality, and when reality contradicts assumptions, adaptation must be swift. That's the first principle. The RAF assumed in 1935 that bomber formations would arrive unescorted and that turret-armed fighters could engage them effectively. By May 1940, this assumption proved wrong, and by August 1940, the price of clinging to it became unsustainable. Specialized aircraft designed for specific missions can excel in those roles while failing completely in others, and that's the second principle. The Defiant failed as a day fighter, but succeeded as a night fighter because the mission requirements differed fundamentally. During the day against escorted bombers and defending fighters, the Defiant's lack of forward armament and reduced performance were fatal weaknesses. At night, against individual bombers with no fighter escort, the same aircraft's concentrated firepower in a turret proved effective, and the difference wasn't the aircraft, but the context in which it operated. Crew coordination matters as much as aircraft performance. That's the third principle. Thorn and Fred Barker, Fred Gash and Desmond Hughes, these partnerships achieved success because pilot and gunner worked as integrated teams. The pilot positioned the aircraft to give the gunner the best possible firing solution while keeping the aircraft out of vulnerable positions. The gunner acquired and engaged targets while watching for threats the pilot couldn't see, and communication and trust and hundreds of hours of flying together created effectiveness that individual skill alone couldn't achieve. Tactics can compensate for design limitations to some degree, but can't overcome fundamental flaws, and that's the fourth principle. The defensive Luftwaffe circle that 264 Squadron developed allowed Defiants to survive encounters with Bf-109s by providing mutual support and 360-degree defensive fire, but it required sacrificing altitude and couldn't be maintained indefinitely. And against determined attacks by superior numbers of more capable aircraft, even good tactics couldn't prevent losses. Courage can't substitute for capability, the fifth principle. Defiant crews who flew in daylight during August 1940 were as brave as any fighter pilots in the RAF, but their bravery couldn't overcome the fact that their aircraft was unsuited for the mission they'd been given, and 9 aircraft and crews lost in 5 days wasn't the result of cowardice or poor performance by the crews, but of asking them to do something their aircraft couldn't accomplish. Effective military equipment must match the operational environment. That's the sixth principle. The Defiant was designed for an environment that didn't exist. Unescorted bombers approaching Britain in daylight formations from bases too distant for fighter escort, when the actual environment turned out to be escorted bombers, with Bf-109s operating from French bases. The Defiant's design became a liability rather than an asset, and the night environment with unescorted individual bombers more closely matched the original design assumptions. There, the Defiant found success. These principles apply beyond the Defiant to military aviation generally. Aircraft must be designed for realistic scenarios and tested in conditions matching actual combat, and adapted quickly when assumptions prove wrong and employed in roles that match their capabilities. Crews must be trained to work as teams, developing the coordination and communication necessary for effective combat. Tactics must be developed that play to equipment strengths while minimizing weaknesses, and when an aircraft proves unsuitable for its intended role, leadership must recognize this quickly and find alternative uses or withdraw the type from service before losses become excessive. The Defiant also illustrates the difference between individual achievement and systemic success. Individual crews like Thorn and Barker and Hughes and Gash achieved remarkable results, but the overall Defiant program can't be judged a success based on those individual achievements. The aircraft as a whole failed to fulfill its intended role and suffered unacceptable losses and was withdrawn from day fighting after demonstrating its vulnerabilities, and the individual skill and courage of exceptional crews couldn't redeem a flawed concept. Fred Gash's name appears on the Battle of Britain Memorial at Westminster Embankment, among the nearly 3,000 aircrew who flew at least one operational sortie during the qualifying period. The memorial makes no distinction between pilots and gunners, between those who achieved multiple kills and those who flew patrols without encountering the enemy, between those who survived the war and those who died, and all who participated are remembered equally. The Battle of Britain Chapel at Westminster Abbey, unveiled by King George VI on 10th of July 1947, contains the roll of honor with the names of 1,497 pilots and aircrew killed or mortally wounded during the battle. Ted Thorn and Fred Barker survived the Battle of Britain and aren't listed on this particular memorial, but many of their squadron mates appear there having died in the 5-day period in August 1940 or in other actions during the qualifying period. The awards system of the time favored pilots over gunners to some degree, though not absolutely. The Victoria Cross, Britain's highest decoration for valor, was never awarded to an RAF air gunner for air combat, though gunners in other contexts did receive it. The Distinguished Service Order and Distinguished Flying Cross were reserved primarily for officers, which in practice meant mostly pilots, though some navigators and other aircrew received them, and the Distinguished Flying Medal was available to NCO aircrew, including gunners, with both Fred Gash and Fred Barker receiving this award. The disparity in recognition between pilots and gunners reflected military culture more than the relative danger or importance of the roles. Pilots commanded the aircraft and made tactical decisions. The award system prioritized command responsibility. Gunners, regardless of their skill or the kills they achieved, were considered supporting the pilot's mission rather than conducting their own. And this perspective undervalued the gunner's contribution, but was consistent with how air forces of the period understood combat roles. Public recognition also favored pilots. Fighter races became celebrities with their names and photographs, appearing in newspapers, and their achievements publicized for morale purposes. Air gunners, even those with impressive kill counts, rarely received similar public attention. The image of the solitary fighter pilot appealed to public imagination in ways that a two-man crew in a turret fighter didn't, and the publicity apparatus of the RAF promoted what appealed to the public. Post-war RAF memorial culture has been more balanced. Modern commemorations recognize that air combat involved entire crews, that gunners faced the same dangers as pilots, and that achievements should be attributed to teams rather than individuals when appropriate. And the Imperial War Museums, in their photograph of Hughes and Gash's Defiant, specifically note it was flown by the effective night-fighting team of both men, giving equal credit. Fred Gash's name appearing on the Battle of Britain Memorial ensures he's remembered among the few. The term Winston Churchill coined in his famous speech acknowledging the fighter crews who defended Britain in 1940. Being a gunner rather than a pilot doesn't diminish his inclusion. He flew operational sorties during the qualifying period and faced enemy fire and contributed to the defense of Britain and earned his place among those commemorated. Hughes's eventual rise to Air Vice Marshal brought its own form of recognition. Wearing the DFC with 2 bars and the 1939-45 star with Battle of Britain rosette served as visible reminders of his combat service. His position as Commandant of Cranwell meant younger generations of RAF officers learned about his achievements, and the gathering of Eagle's Foundation biography of Hughes ensures his story is preserved in detail. Thorn's tragic death in 1946 meant he didn't live to see how military aviation evolved in the post-war period, but his Distinguished Flying Cross with Bars and Distinguished Flying Medal with Bar, earned for combat achievements, marked him as one of the most successful and decorated Defiant pilots of the war, and the fact that he and Barker together accumulated 12 to 13 confirmed kills, the highest total for any Defiant crew, ensures their names appear in every serious history of the aircraft and the squadrons that flew it. Physical preservation of evidence also serves a memorial function. Recovery of the Heinkel 2994 wreckage and its identification through the maker's plate showing serial number 2994 means that specific combat engagement on 12-13 March 1941 is documented not just through paper records, but through physical artifacts, and the Dornier Du 17 at RAF Museum Cosford, even if its exact attribution remains uncertain, represents the kind of aircraft Defiant crews engaged and the physical reality of air combat. The single surviving complete Defiant at the RAF Museum Hendon serves as a memorial to all who flew the type. Visitors can see the turret and understand the cramped conditions the gunner worked in, and appreciate the technical complexity of the powered turret mechanism, and imagine what it meant to fly this aircraft into combat knowing its vulnerabilities. And the preserved aircraft makes the history tangible in ways that photographs and documents alone cannot. Fred Gash joined the RAF in September 1939, trained as an air gunner and paired with Desmond Hughes to fly Boulton Paul Defiants with 264 Squadron, and together they achieved at least 5 confirmed kills, 1 probable and 1 damaged, between August 1940 and April 1941. Combat reports bearing their signatures document these engagements. Physical evidence exists in the form of excavated wreckage from a Heinkel they shot down in March 1941. Photographs show their aircraft with 5 kill markings. Gash received the Distinguished Flying Medal gazetted in April 1941, and his name appears on the Battle of Britain Memorial. Ted Thorn and Fred Barker flew together from May 1940 to October 1941 and became the most successful Defiant crew of the war. With 12 to 13 confirmed kills, they received the Distinguished Flying Medal and Bar, with citations describing specific engagements, including one where they shot down an attacking fighter while their own aircraft was on fire. Thorn went on to command a Hurricane squadron and received the DFC with bars before being killed testing a jet fighter in 1946, and Barker served as an instructor and was released from the RAF as a flying officer in 1946. Desmond Hughes continued his combat career converting to Beaufighters and then Mosquitoes, eventually commanding 604 Squadron and achieving a total of 18.5 enemy aircraft destroyed, and he retired as Air Vice Marshal in 1974 after a distinguished post-war career that included commanding RAF College Cranwell during Prince Charles's training. These are verified facts supported by primary source documentation. The combat reports exist, the awards were gazetted, the photographs survive. The wreckage was excavated. The German pilot who was shot down gave his account. Colleagues who worked with Gash after the war remembered him. Family members preserved memorabilia. Archives hold squadron records, and museums display photographs and artifacts. The Boulton Paul Defiant failed as a day fighter because its design assumed combat conditions that didn't exist, but it found success as a night fighter, where its concentrated turret firepower proved effective against unescorted bombers, and individual crews achieved remarkable results through skill and courage and coordination, but couldn't overcome the fundamental limitations of an aircraft unsuited for its primary intended role. Documentation exists because these were real military operations conducted by a professional air force that kept detailed records. Every operational sortie was logged. Every combat engagement required a combat report. Every kill claim was investigated. Every award required a citation describing the action that earned it. Photographs were taken for identification and intelligence and morale purposes. Squadron diaries recorded daily activities, personal letters and memoirs added individual perspectives, and post-war historians compiled these sources into comprehensive accounts. This is what verified military history looks like, not anonymous stories with no names or dates or locations, not claims that appear only on internet forums with no supporting documentation, not legends that sound impressive but leave no trace in official records. And real history has names and dates and places and documents and photographs and physical artifacts and multiple independent sources that corroborate each other. Fred Gash and Desmond Hughes and Ted Thorn and Frederick Barker existed. They flew Boulton Paul Defiants with 264 Squadron. They shot down German aircraft in documented engagements. They received official recognition during their lifetimes, and after the war, some went on to distinguished careers, while others returned to civilian life. The evidence of their service survives in archives and museums and memorials, accessible to anyone who wants to verify the facts. Their story doesn't need embellishment. The reality of two men flying into combat in an aircraft with no forward-firing guns, relying entirely on coordination between pilot and gunner, engaging enemy bombers and fighters despite knowing their aircraft's vulnerabilities, achieving verified kills against operational German aircraft, and surviving to receive recognition for their achievements is compelling enough without invention. The Defiant gunners represent the thousands of RAF aircrew whose names don't appear in lists of famous aces, but who contributed to Britain's defense during the Second World War. They flew missions that needed flying, engaged enemies that needed engaging, and accepted risks that were part of military service. Some became moderately well-known through awards and post-war careers, while others returned to civilian life and quiet obscurity, and all deserve to be remembered accurately, with their actual achievements documented through verifiable evidence rather than replaced by dramatic legends that sound better but aren't true. That's the standard this video has attempted to meet. Every fact stated has been verified through primary or reliable secondary sources. Uncertainties have been acknowledged. Claims that couldn't be verified have been omitted or clearly marked, and the goal has been accuracy over entertainment, though the two need not be mutually exclusive when the real story is genuinely interesting. Fred Gash and the Defiant gunners were real RAF heroes who shot down German bombers with documented evidence. They flew an unusual and ultimately unsuccessful aircraft design, but they made it work when conditions allowed. Their names appear on memorials, their combat reports exist in archives, their aircraft with kill markings were photographed, and the wrecks of aircraft they shot down have been excavated from English fields. This is their story, verified through the documentary record, preserved for historical accuracy.